Well, what happened in Egypt is raising questions about the unseen side of airport security. That's where workers enter the airport, load cargo onto planes, and screen bags. Let's talk about this with Seth Kaplan, managing partner at Airline Weekly. He joins us from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Seth, welcome.
Good to be with you, Asiye.
So how secure are the parts of the airport that we, the passengers, never actually see?
Well, much more secure than they once were. As we heard in that report, certainly a lot of progress since 9/11. Back before 9/11, when passengers checked bags rather than carrying them on to aircraft, most of those checked bags weren't really screened. Whereas nowadays, virtually all of them are. So that's just one example of big improvements that have been made. But yeah, as we learned clearly in Egypt, not airtight, and obviously you're going to have regional differences. Some places where it's perhaps more secure than others. Egypt, we're seeing very clearly the vulnerabilities that seem to have existed there.
Now, this is something, I have friends in the aviation industry, and we've had this discussion many times. How much difference is there in security protocols between passengers and the crew, the pilots and flight attendants, and not just in the U.S., but, Seth, around the world?
Yeah, a big difference, but that's predicated partly on the idea that, when you screen people very carefully, you don't have to do quite as much as you would do with somebody who you don't know all that well. And we see that, by the way, Asiye, now with passengers as well. Various countries have trusted traveler programs. In the U.S., there's the pre-check program, similar regimes around the world where, if passengers subject themselves to some rigorous background checks, they then don't have to go through as much at the security checkpoint. And there's some logic in that the idea that somebody who you've checked very carefully, maybe better to focus the resources on the person who you don't know as much about. But as we heard there in that report, if somebody is screened and then, has many years on the job, obviously people change. And perhaps you at some point, need to do some of those checks again.
So are you a supporter of airport employees and crew be more thoroughly screened and more frequently, perhaps?
Yeah, and again, one thing, once we learn more about what happened in Egypt, obviously that'll be instructive in terms of, going forward, what should be done. One thing, Asiye, I think we have to remember is that you sort of have two components here. You have the airport security issue, and then you have just intelligence, national intelligence. And when we think about what went wrong, for example, on 9/11, that wasn't really an airport security failure. That was a national intelligence failure. I mean, those box cutters that were allowed through that day were legal on that day. What we had was this plot that was unfolding in this country, and a lot of signs of it that perhaps could have been detected that were not. And conversely, when we see plots that have been foiled, my mind goes to, now almost a decade ago, the transatlantic bomb plots, the 7 flights out of the UK that were, planned to be blown up by terrorists using liquid explosives. That, by the way, is what led to the whole liquids ban that, was only gradually relaxed over the years. There, that wasn't something that was detected at the airport. That was a success of the intelligence operatives in that case in the UK. So yeah, certainly more can always be done at the airport, but so much of it has to do also with just sort of broader national security checkpoints. And if anything, Asiye, the good news about the airport in particular is that you can take measures that, as we all too tragically learned in Paris last week, are even harder to take when you're talking about trying to secure restaurants and all these other kinds of venues.
Those soft targets. You're absolutely right about that. All right, Seth Kaplan, thank you so much.